I'm Diane Blazik. I am from National Garden Bureau, and we are putting on today's Ask the Expert webinar, and we're talking about edible perennials. I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists, let them say a few words about themselves and their companies, and then we're going to jump right into things. So we have on our panel April Herring from Pacific Plug and Liner, Katie Tammany, from
Okay.
Monrovia, and Kristen Pullen from Star Roses and Plants. So let's go back in that order. And April, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
All right. Well, thank you, Diane. I work currently at Pacific Plug and Liner. I am the marketing director there, in charge of the marketing, talking about product. But at Pacific Plug and Liner, we specialize in perennials. So this is a great webinar to join in on. Currently, we list, because we're working on pricing right now, 3,000 different perennials. Yeah. So there's a lot of perennials out there, but yeah, it'll be interesting to hear about perennials that are edible as well, as coming back year after year. So yeah, I work in not only marketing but product development for Pacific Plug and Liner.
Great, thank you. Okay, and Katie, tell us about yourself.
Sure. I'm Katie Tammany. I'm head of marketing and trend research for Monrovia Nursery. We're a large nationwide grower with 3 nurseries across the country. We grow perennials, shrubs, trees, houseplants, lots of wonderful edible perennials and shrubs and trees. Um, and we're about to celebrate our 100th anniversary next year. So we're very excited about that. And I think a lot of people know our website is a great resource for gardening information, monrovia.com. So yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Diane.
Great, thank you. Yes, and Gail is there posting websites for our panel, so that's great. And congratulations on the 100 years. National Garden Bureau celebrated our 100th year 5 years ago, which 2020 was not a great year to do any celebrations. So I feel like maybe we should be celebrating our 105 or something, but
Absolutely.
yeah, congratulations to you. And Kristen, let's hear about you.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. I'm with new product development at Star Roses and Plants. You might know us as a house of brands from our knockout and drift roses, as well as bloomables, and also our Bushel and Berry brand, which is a line of edible shrubs. So it fits right in with this conversation. Um, we've been around for 125 years. We specialize in breeding, distribution of young plant liners to finished growers like Monrovia and others. And we introduce new intellectual property. So we trial and test new plants to bring them to market.
Thank you.
One of our favorite shrubs is from Star, Superlicious Blackberry. It's a boneless, compact, a real winner. It's not in my list to talk about today, but I love that plant.
You can talk about it. In fact, we already have one question about blackberries. So I like to kind of get these questions out there, and I don't know which of you wants to address this. She's asking about the small whitish worms in blackberries. How do you get rid of those or prevent those?
Those are new to me. I'm not going to be able to answer that one. I don't know if Kristen can, but
You know, I'm not exactly sure what the pest is, and I'm not sure if they're seeing it on the plant or in the fruit after they harvest it, but I know there's a way you can wash your fruit with a mixture of like water and baking soda, and it tends to like expel any kind of pest or debris out of the fruit. And I think there's ratios for that online, but I've seen a lot of trends of TikTok videos and people posting about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so that basically after harvest to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't consume them. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Now let's do talk about defining edible perennials. I know, no matter where you live, you might have a different definition. So kind of in general terms for today, what are we talking about when we're talking edible perennials? What kind of zone hardiness are we talking about?
when
I,
I, oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go for it, April.
No, I would think, pretty hardy, something that is going to last. I mean, even come back in the Midwest or something like zone 4, those type of zones, would be my personal thought about it. Like PPNL is located in California. You can't count things that come back there. So, that's just my personal opinion.
I would say, they can be zone 4, like some of our fruit trees that we grow. But the blueberries, zone 5 and up. Um, and then, yes, obviously some things that like a little bit warmer climate, zone 7 or 8. So I don't know that I would really define it by zone. I think of the term edible perennial as conjuring up something that's going to look good in my garden year round. So depending on where you are, that's going to affect the choices that you have. But to me, it's differentiating between like an edible annual, like a lot of vegetables that, tomatoes, et cetera, that people plant. An edible perennial is a wonderful plant you can add to your garden to give you that feeling of a garden of abundance. We do a lot of trend research at Monrovia, and that's definitely something we see a lot of people becoming more interested in using edible plants in their, overall landscape, not just like in their front yard or, in a pretty border, not just thinking about it in a raised bed. So when I think edible perennials, I think you have lots of ways to use it in the landscape.
I would also add, I think there's also edible perennials for container gardening too. So I kind of differentiate it as like something I buy an input for my containers or garden every single year would be an annual. But if it's something I'm planting, to Katie's point, and expecting it to come back year after year in the ground or a patio container, that would be an edible perennial for me.
Good definitions. Thank you. Now, here's one of the things that I love to ask our panelists in the beginning, and that would be what's some of the most frequently asked questions you get from customers, friends, family, etc., when it comes to growing edibles, growing perennials, growing edible perennials? What's your frequently asked question, and then what's your answer? So we'll go through all three of you with that, and then we'll go through our slideshow and show some specific varieties.
I'll take on it first. So for me, this is like questions from my friends. Being in the horticulture industry, people that know you, they're like, "Oh, well, you're in the horticulture industry. You're like an expert. You should know all the plants that you should be able to grow." And I currently live in Bend, Oregon. It's in the central Oregon high desert climate, so it's pretty harsh. The soil is like moon dust, very cold in the winter, and a lot of animal, I would say, deer and chipmunks, coming to eat the plants. So people are always asking, what kind of perennials should we grow? And, we don't have a lot good water, soil is not good and the, just the pressure from animals. So yeah, that's the kind of questions I get. So I'm always thinking, even for my own garden, what type of plants actually will survive this crazy climate here? And so those are the type of questions I get. And just through trial and error on my own part, I see, definitely different perennials that are more hardy for the edible portion of it. The herbs are great for our area. They are, the chipmunks won't eat them, and they overwinter. Things like chives, a great edible perennial for us. So I like to, see what lasts in my garden and then recommend it to my friends. Because yeah, some of the mainstream items in the industry that might do good in other areas, not so good here. So it's trial and error. But yeah, definitely I'm excited about the edible perennial subject because there's definitely I did a little research before this and I was like, oh, there's some interesting things that I need to try in my garden that might work here. And also the idea with edible perennials that they because our season is very short, because our winters seem to last a long time. So if it's a perennial, it'll come back a lot faster, and you don't need that winter protection. Like for a tomato, it's nearly impossible to get tomato to fruit here. So having an edible perennial would, it's going to come back naturally, and you don't have to have a little tunnel over it and all of that stuff. So these are the type of things that I recommend to my friends.
Great. Good recommendations. Katie or Kristen?
I'll go. I love that, April, about, living in such a tough area, the fact that you can still grow a lot of edible perennials there. I think one of the questions I get is it difficult to grow blueberries, or is it difficult to grow, a fruit tree? And difficult, I always think, well, it's a plant, so you want to put it in the right environment. And I think the big thing about blueberries that we hear a lot of is people ask the question, do I need more than one blueberry, as a pollinizer to get a lot of fruit? And our advice is, usually yes, that'll give you more. You can get some fruit from just planting one of our blueberries, but it's better if you plant, two. Together, similar with our fruit trees, and just think about, a little bit more abundance. So that's a question we get a lot. And then the other is, do I live in a climate that's cold enough to grow blueberries? I'm in California. I'm in a zone 10, and a lot of people think you can't grow blueberries in zone 10, but you can. The variety that I'll talk about shortly that needs fewer chill hours. You really want to be paying attention to chill hours when it comes to blueberries and some other fruit to figure out if you can grow it in a warmer environment.
Thank you. And Kristen?
Yeah, I think it adds on to the type of environment, but I think the question I usually get a lot is, why aren't my plants fruiting? And then I think, that branches us off into really two major things is for a lot of these fruiting shrubs that bloom on old wood and fruit on old wood, when should you be trimming so that you don't trim off the flower buds for the next year? So, talking about making sure that you're trimming, immediately after flowering. If you want to shape the plant, you'll lose the fruit for that year, but you'll get the fruit again next year. And then making sure that not only are you looking up your hardiness zone, but you're looking up the average chill hours that your area gets. I'm in southeastern Pennsylvania, so we're zone 6. So we're not as concerned as needing low chill as some areas of California, but it's very important to know both those pieces when picking edible perennials.
And is that information readily available on plant tags or websites? Where would you recommend finding that?
So typically all of the plants that require chill hours will have it on their plant tags. Blueberries, fruit trees, that information is on there. And then a lot of it is available online. There's good websites that also have like a national chill hours map. It's averages, but I think there's some on Stark Brothers. I think there might be one from USDA as well. So that's posted there.
Great, thank you. Okay. Katie, I think you're up first, and we're going to go through our fairly short presentation, but we wanted to get some specific plants and varieties in here mentioned. So Katie, you can take it away.
Sure. So talking about berries and chill hours, I want to talk about our Bountiful blueberry collection of blueberries. We came out with the first one, the one on the far right here is Bountiful Blue blueberry. And that we introduced in 2009. So it's been out, for a long time. It's one of our most popular edible plants, probably in the, top, I don't know, top 10 of plants that we sell across the country. But it needs a very low amount of chill hours, like 150 to 200 chill hours, and it'll be fine. It gets about 3 to 4 feet tall, produces wonderful, abundance of berries. It's just a real reliable blueberry. And then we've added to that collection in recent years, Bountiful Bell. We introduced that 2 years ago. That's in the middle there. And the interesting thing about this blueberry is that really beautiful pink stem, and it gets sort of this icy pink new foliage when it just emerges. It's really pretty as an ornamental shrub, even before it starts fruiting. This blueberry is zone 5 through 9. Bountiful Belle is zone 6 to 10. And then Bountiful Baby is the one on the far left. And that is, as you'd imagine, really compact. It stays about 2 feet tall, but produces a ton of fruit. And it would be great in the, front part of the border or in a pot. It grows really well in a container. Again, zone 5 through 9. Those blueberries need more chill hours. Belle and Baby both need about 800 chill hours, but really fantastic fruit producers. So if you want to have that healthy snack, within reach at all times, I really encourage people to plant blueberries. We introduced a line of new fruit trees last year called Fruit Snacks. There's a golden and a red and a green option. And what's interesting about these trees is they stay really narrow. They get about 2 feet wide, 8 to 10 feet tall. So they fit really well in a lot of small spaces. You can even have them in a container. They're also scab resistant, and they don't need as much like spraying and kind of chemical treatment to keep them healthy as other apple trees do. So if you want to plant, you think you want to plant a couple of fruit trees, apple trees, but you don't have a lot of room, these would make great options from that. This is from a breeder, Plant Nouveau. This is, who we got the fruit trees from. And we sold out of these last season. We could not keep them in stock. So I think there's really, a need out there for more compact, or more like, let's say, well-behaved fruit trees. And I think that they're going to be introducing other fruits in this line. We also have a dwarf nectarine, another dwarf pomegranate. So people can have some of these, fruits that used to think you had to have a bigger space. You can actually do a lot with some newer varieties in a small space or in a container.
I love that we can grow them in our shrinking lot sizes.
In places that you didn't think you could before.
Right.
Sweet and solo kiwi. So the name kind of says it all, that it doesn't need, it's a female kiwi that doesn't need a pollinizer. It's self-fertile. And so you only need one. It's a really vigorous vine. It's zone 7 to 9, so a little bit warmer climate. But if you're looking for a kind of a different sort of fruit, to add to your garden, think about kiwis, especially because you get that wonderful vine, the height, the growing a vine along a fence or a trellis, and you get the bonus of the fruit with that. So I love this little kiwi. And then this one, Little Ragu Sweet Bay, is one of my favorite plants that surprises people. So it's a sweet bay. It's a bay laurel. You can take off the leaves, use it in soups and stews, and it's a really lovely, more compact bay laurel. So you can have it as a shrub, evergreen, in a lot of climates. I think it is. I'm trying to think what the zones are. I'll have to look that up. But I want to say it's zone 6, 6 through 10. It's a great shrub, it's a great shrub for the front yard. And then you just have it just take off the leaves as you need it for cooking. I think it's such a nice little secret. It's become so popular. We actually now sell this plant in Europe. We were the breeder, but the discoverer of it. One of our nursery managers discovered a sport off of another bay laurel, and we propagated it and found that it stayed, beautifully compact and well shaped. And so that's since it's gone worldwide now, but that's one of my favorite edible perennials. Just has really pretty glossy foliage, and it shapes really well. You can turn it into a topiary. We sell topiary cones at Christmas time. They make great Christmas gifts. I just love this plant.
Great ideas there with it. Thank you. Okay, Kristen, it's time for you to talk about a couple varieties.
Sure. So I'll start out by saying all of our edible shrubs from Star can be found at retail under our Bushel and Berry brand. They're also available online under that name. So Berry Bucks is one of them that I wanted to call out. While all of the breeding in this brand was made so that you can grow them in containers on patio spaces, we also have really great landscape uses. So Berry Bucks was named, you might guess, for its look to buxus or boxwood. You can use it as a low growing hedge. It only gets to about 2 feet by 3 feet. And then it has 3 seasons of interest. So it has the nice white flowers in spring, followed by a really good abundance of small, dark fruit. And then it also gets really good fall foliage color. So it gets really red and burgundy in the fall. So as we talked about in the beginning, these plants that give you something to look forward to in your garden like all season long. So that's awesome as like a low border. This is the lineup of the brand. So we primarily started with blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries. That we've since added strawberries and then some low chill options that are outside of just berries. We added a tea camellia, which is there on the right. So it's a Camellia sinensis. It's a camellia that can handle full sun. And it's a really great evergreen plant in zones 7 through 9. You can shape it into hedges like other evergreens, and then you can harvest your own tea from the plant. So a question I get a lot is it worth it? Does it take too long? I don't want to dry my own tea. It's not that difficult. Actually, it's super simple. You could just take the top 2 sets of leaves off of the new growth, put it in a plate in your microwave for 30 seconds till they get kind of soft. You roll it into a ball and then you put it into your tea water, the boiling water for, a couple of minutes, and then you have your own green tea at home. So where it's hardy, those zones 7 through 9, it's awesome to have an evergreen hedge that you can then dual purpose. And then we also have a passion fruit, which is, if you're in zones 9 to 11, it's a perennial. But it's great because it's more compact, only gets to about 10 feet at maturity. Typical passion fruit vines can put on like 30 to 40 feet a year. So those can be really hard to maintain. This one's much more well behaved. Gets really nice, that sweet and tangy fruit. And then it also is a really nice host for native pollinators along the Gulf Coast. So it's host to the fritillaria butterfly. So it's a really nice plant to have in your garden, growing up a trellis or, a large pot with some training. Could go to the next slide. And this is one of our raspberries. So what's really nice about this one is not only can it be grown in the container, it's super compact, but it also is thornless. So it's really like pet, kid, people friendly. You're not going to get, poked or anything when you're harvesting your berries, or there's people, entertaining around it or kids playing around it. Really nice flush of fruits and flowers on that plant. It does behave as normal caneberries do. So, in the ground, they tend to produce suckers, which is nice to keep this one in a container that the habit's well maintained. And then you don't necessarily have to worry about trying to keep a blackberry or a raspberry to a certain position every year. So that's raspberry shortcake.
And would you have to prune out the canes similar to if you were growing it in ground?
So I actually haven't had to do that much in the container unless it starts to get, really too big for the container and you don't want to put it up into a different size. Then you would go in and thin out the canes to just keep it to a manageable size for your container.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. And then strawberries. So, these might be something that people do buy every year, but these are hardy to zone 4. So we have 3 strawberry varieties. There are 3 different flower colors, which makes them awesome for mixing a red, a white, and a pink flower into a hanging basket or any kind of planter. They produce smaller fruits, but they're much higher sugar content than you would typically get from a grocery store strawberry. So you have the ornamental flowers and then the really sweet fruits. And then these are ever-bearing strawberries. So there's 2 kinds of strawberries. Some just produce 1 crop early season. These ever-bearing strawberries will continue to flower and fruit throughout the year. So you get that ornamental appeal with the flowers. and the fruit all the way through for interest in your garden.
Very nice. Thank you. And to
Yeah.
continue that strawberry theme, April, I think you were going to talk about Delizz. This is one of our AAS winners, and it can be grown from seed.
Yes, so we grow a number of strawberries from ABZ seeds. So they have a nice lineup. Delizz is known for its, nice berries, good flavor, and it is like the Star Roses varieties, ever-bearing. So you're getting multiple flushes of fruit throughout the year, and pretty widely available since it is from seed on this one. And they also offer ABC seeds, other varieties that have pink flowers, red flowers. And like Kristen said, strawberries are great, not only in the ground, but think of them as that perennial because they have the flowers. They can be a basket, type of product, or even in a planter off to the side. Some strawberries, they might trail a bit more. We actually, I forgot to send this one, but we have one called hula berry, which is a white strawberry. It's a pine berry type, which trails a lot. So you get kind of that spiller effect if you did like a mixed container. That one in particular, it needs a pollinator. So these ABC seeds, they don't need pollinators, but that one does. So it makes an interesting story because you can get the white strawberry, but you also get the red strawberry from the pollinator, which is Sonata. So that's strawberries.
Great. Thank you. Okay, does anybody want to talk about asparagus?
I've never personally grown asparagus. I've seen it in places, but it is much like the asparagus fern, I would say, where it's got that ferny appearance. And then the asparagus shoot that you're eating is just like the shoot that, if you left it there, it would become, more plant-like. So I think this could be a great addition for gardens or even containers because it's so hardy of a plant. Maybe I don't know what zone hardy, but I mean like tough as a plant. So yeah, I'm excited to try this one in my own garden, which is mostly container gardening at this point. So, but it looks like a good item to try.
Because of your tough soil, you've got to do.
Yeah, and it's like we haven't done any raised beds, and because our lot is actually lava rock, so it's like you dig and it's just rocks. So and then we'd need an enclosure for all the animals. So yeah, container gardening it is for now.
Good luck with that. Yeah. Fennel. I'm not sure if any of you have grown fennel. This is another AAS winner. It's called Antares. So this one is available as seed, and depending on your zone, probably as low as zone 4, will have some good hardiness. Could possibly even be sown in the fall. So I don't know if any of you guys want to talk about fennel, if you've had any experience with this one or other fennels.
I have not, but I would like to grow fennel. We were talking about tea earlier with the Camellia sinensis, and fennel makes great tea. Really, it's good for your digestion. So I think it would be a winner to add. And it seems pretty, it could be an easy one to grow, especially where I am in California.
Just make sure you harvest it at the right time before the taste goes bad.
It looks like it makes a nice, like, airy appearance in the garden too. So
Yeah.
a whole new texture to your garden.
Right. You can mix it with your ornamentals to have that airiness there. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I have an edible bulb to go with it. That's good. So I was just curious by throwing this one in. Have you guys ever thrown? You've thrown the horseradish away. I don't know. Have you ever grown horseradish?
Not.
I have not, and I am curious. I'm not even sure what the plant looks like.
It looks like a big overgrown weed, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I've never grown it. I just know its reputation. Like, I love the taste of horseradish, but I'd say if you were going to plant it, I would put it in a container because you don't want to be digging it out later. It will take off.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe a little aggressive for most of us. And rhubarb.
Not grown it.
Not grown it, but I know just reading about it, it's very hard, another hardy item. And then with those stems, it's very ornamental in appearance. So you could get that 2-for-1, edible and ornamental look in the garden. And yeah, again, coming back year after year, when it overwinters, you're going to get those stems earlier than if you had just planted something and having to let it settle into your garden. So I think that's a good point about these.
Yeah, like the asparagus, a good spring harvest. So it's a
And,
sign
and
that spring is here.
another one that comes to mind after looking at these is artichokes, and they're zone 6 hardy, with that beautiful purple, big flower. If you let it flower, and and bees love that, and it has these really dramatic, serrated, foliage that looks it's a great sculptural plant in the garden. I recommend artichokes, and they're fast growing. They tend to be really easy to grow if you're sort of new to ornamental edibles.
That would be fun. Grow your own artichokes. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to quit sharing the screen so we can see your lovely faces, and I'm going to ask a few questions. And I know this question is a little difficult, so you're going to say, well, it depends on which one we're talking about. But overall, when we say perennial, and I know that it's dependent, but how long do most edible perennials last? I think we just kind of mentioned that horseradish will be there until the world ends. But what about some of the other things? Is it tender perennials? Will you get like 2 seasons of harvest, or are we talking about a lot of things that will have a lot more longevity?
I think it depends on the item. I mean, like some of these berry shrubs, they could last years and years. And I was just talking to my husband, like with mint, he said his mom planted some in 1970 and it's still going. So, so yeah, I think it's dependent on the item, but also the area where you plant it. So, but yeah, I think some can go on for a really long time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've got rosemary that's been going since the beginning of time, it seems. I'm curious, Kristen, what you think about strawberries. I know depending on where you plant them, but how often you would have to, re-up your strawberry plants.
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen them last quite a long time, but then over time I've seen the berries not be as many. You'd think as they got older you would get more, and I've not seen that. I don't know if the wildlife's getting to them, but I do tend to add strawberries back into my planting usually every like 3 years at
Yeah,
the most.
I think that's my situation. I wasn't sure if I was just being, I don't know, fussy, but they tend to last like 3 years.
I think
Yeah.
strawberries too. I mean, our location is in Watsonville, the strawberry capital,
Yeah.
and those growers, they're replacing them, every, so many years because just the vigor declines over the years with strawberries. So yeah, I think it is one that needs to be replaced.
Yeah, they put so much energy into producing all that fruit that, yeah, they eventually decline. So replacing those, like you say, probably every 3 years is a great idea. Okay, so I'm gonna hop around to some of the questions that we've asked, which is going to be kind of all over the board. What about controlling coddling moss in your apple trees organically? Can you do that? Very specific question about apple trees. And would it help if you knew where she was located?
I am not a pest expert, and I know it is so regional, micro-regional dependent. So what what I tend to tell people is, really go to a local source like your, university or extension or garden center, that has more experience with pests in your area than I would be able to talk about.
I would definitely agree with that. We like sending people to their extension and their local garden center, just because there may be different zoning ordinances or something like this. And like we say, regionality, you really need to have somebody local. So that's good advice. Here's a question about what hardy edible citrus fruit trees are suitable for zone 7A.
We do not grow citrus, so
We do not either.
yeah.
Yeah, we don't either. It's a very controlled supply chain. There's, pockets, well, not pockets of it, but like the main centers are like California, Texas, and Florida.
Yeah.
And I know they can't even ship plants between those states. So again, I think depending on where you are, I think universities do a lot of citrus research. They might have some recommendations too.
Good point. Yes. Next question here, and I've got some thoughts on this, but somebody says, I'm thinking of creating shallow gardens inside old gutters on ground to flow like a stream. Would put the drainage holes in the gutter, and what type of plants might you suggest? And it's zone 8B. And my first thought is with the small amount of soil or potting medium that you're able to put in there, maybe lettuces and greens would be good. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to get, I don't know, would strawberries be okay in a small space like that in zone 8B?
Probably. I mean, I've seen them in really tiny planters, but I don't know that they'll last for the 3 years that we were talking about in that shallow space.
I think a lot of herbs would do well, thinking about oregano, which looks so pretty, and that would be okay in zone 8. And they don't need a lot of depth either,
Yeah.
So I would think about herbs.
Yeah, great. Okay. So you talked a lot about perennials in containers and raised beds. So can we expand on that? Because that's such a hot topic. Everybody likes that. They don't have as much space. So what are some tips, especially when it comes to like zone hardiness with growing in containers or raised beds? I'm sure I have like follow-up questions too, but who wants to start on that?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Nope, you go.
For me, that's what I do is container gardening because I don't have in-ground gardening. I don't even have raised beds. So the container gardening is something where, yes, you can move them around, be playful with your mixes. You don't have to be so traditional, like break it up, like put some herbs with a traditional perennial and, you can harvest your, herbs, even though, it's like, it looks like a nice mixed container. And then as for me, as far as overwintering, I this year because I have all my mixed containers on a covered patio, I took them off and just put them out in the open, so they just sat in the snow and all that over winter. And then this, like once it came spring, they started growing again. I was like, okay, now it's time to clean them up and go put them back on the patio and start watering them. So it's definitely possible to continue to keep those containers going, over winter, and then and then you enjoy them the next year. So I've been enjoying like chives for 5 years now in this planter, and they look great. So it's definitely can be done.
I was just going to say that container gardening allows you to try some things, that might be on the edge, zone wise. For instance, we've had gardeners tell us that they have grown our figs in zone 6 or 7, bringing them in to overwinter, like in the garage, and then, taking them back out. They're in Indiana or, other places in the Midwest, they have a fig tree, which is, sort of a surprise, but they can do that because they can overwinter it in a container. And I just think that versatility gives you, a lot of containers give you sort of room to take a little risk with some plants, and that's great. I think if you are going to have an edible perennial in a container, especially here in California, you need to think about watering it more than if it's in the ground. So a blueberry in a container, where I am in Northern California, it just needs to be on you know, more generous watering schedule than you would need to if it's in the landscape. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I would say for us in Pennsylvania moving north, we've had a couple mild winters, but then every once in a while we will get our true zone 6 winter and we'll get extreme temperature fluctuations. So if you're worried about your containers, there's like a couple extra steps you can do. Obviously, you could move them all into a garage if you have the time or the space to do it, but you can also move them up against your house or the side of your house. You can put burlap around the pots to protect the root ball. You can put burlap around the top of the plant to protect it from wind, especially if you're in a cold area where you're not getting snow, because that snow actually does provide protection if your pot gets covered with it. But if it's no snow and it's a really cold winter, taking those extra steps will help keep your plants surviving to the next season.
So are there any general rule of thumb, like if I wanted to grow a fig in zone 5, would I could I do one that's hardy to zone 6 if I put it in a basement or a garage? I'm just saying somebody says that they put it in her basement. And is there a difference in a heated versus an unheated garage? You know, like how much can I really push those zones?
I think it's Chicago hardy fig that is sort of like borderline zone 6. So you could have that in your zone 5 and put it in the basement and push that. I'm not sure I'd push beyond one zone for me. Um,
Yeah, I'd say if you're really wanting to try something, it can be done. Like that passion fruit we talked about. It's only hardy to zone 9, but before we launched it, we had a bunch of our employees testing it out, and we're in zone 6 and zone 5, and they were able to bring it inside as a patio container into like unheated garages and put it back out the next year. So I really think it's where you're at. If you can give them the extra work of bringing them all the way inside, and then just watching the water while you're doing that, since it's kind of dormant and sleeping. That's the other thing, is you don't want to overwater it either, because they can die over the winter from root rot too, from getting too wet and sitting like that in the garage or the basement.
Yeah, I was going to ask about bringing that passion fruit inside, but you could just prune it off before you brought it in.
And we didn't even prune it off. We just let it do its thing, brought the whole container inside, and then when it reflushed in the spring, you could trim off wherever it didn't reflush from.
Excellent. Now, what about these perennials in containers and the soil? You know, when we're planting annuals every year, we can just refresh the soil, put new in. Any recommendations then on what you should do to the soil when you're growing container grown edible perennials?
You want to pick a soil that's well draining and something that's going to hold up for a longer amount of time. So as opposed to planting in like a perennial mix that's really like high in perlite, you want to pick something that has larger particulate in the soil. So you'll see it has like pine bark of different sizes mixed into it, pretty sizable chunks. That will help with drainage, and it'll help keep the air porosity of the soil for a longer period of time, for like 2 or so years, without it getting waterlogged and compact and damaging your roots.
yeah, I don't use potting mix or container necessarily in my containers. I'll use like a raised bed mix in the container, which is a little more has a little bit more of the qualities that Kristen mentioned. Um, And I think sometimes I refresh the soil a little bit, year over year. Like I'll just take some of the soil out if it's getting a little bit compacted and add in some fresh soil.
So another question we have is number of plants for a decent sized harvest. I mean, let's talk about strawberries. I mean, they're so cute, and you make one little hanging basket. will you get one bowl of strawberries? Do I need 5 hanging baskets to get enough for my family? What are some parameters on some of the strawberries or the blueberries or the apples? Like what is the yield per plant?
I'm not sure, but I'm thinking Christian might know.
So it's going to be different by variety. Again, there's definitely different fruit sets to different types. If you're planting something like a top hat blueberry, it's a variety that was bred for commercial production. So it generally produces more fruit, but it's a bigger habit. So I'd say as you get smaller plant habits, you want to have multiple copies, like 2 to 3 of the plants to get, more than just like you said, a bowl of the plant of the fruit. And then we talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but a lot of our plants are they self-pollinating. So if they didn't have a plant with them, you'd still get fruit. But if there's more of them as pollinator plants, you'll get an increased fruit yield. So I think those are 2 things to keep an eye out for. If you have the in-ground space and you can plant top hat and some of the stuff that gets bigger, you might not need quite as many plants.
I always say more is better. If you have the room, go for more. I have 4 strawberry plants, and I get enough to put strawberries, like on my cereal, and not not to go wild with them. It's not like planting zucchini, where you have one zucchini and you have too much zucchini. But our blueberries really have a great yield. The Bountiful Blue really generates, cups and cups of blueberries over the season. So that's a good one.
And I'm glad you brought up blueberries because somebody was asking about pink lemonade, and I'm not sure if that specific variety is one of yours, but she's saying I've had pink lemonade for about 5 years and still only get a few berries on it. And I don't know if pink lemonade is a low yielding variety or if there's any suggestions you have for her to increase the yield on that.
That is not one that we grow, so
Unfortunately, not for us either. We don't have any pink blueberries.
Okay. And
No.
overall, is there a way to do anything to increase the yield on blueberries?
I think you just really want to make sure your soil is, acidic, for sure, and that, if you're fertilizing at the right time, like before it flowers, you get a good flower set, and then, let it be.
So don't over fertilize because you might get plant but not berries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any shade tolerant edible perennials?
Shade tolerant. A lot of the fruiting ones really need the sun, but some of the perennials that we're talking about, like some of the herbs that we mentioned, they'll be fine with a little bit of shade. The little ragu, sweet bay can be in a little bit of shade. It'll be just fine.
Yeah, and I think some of the more leafy types might be okay with some shade. Yeah, because they're not more for the flowers, but I'd have to do some research on which ones. But
Yeah, and somebody brought up that like somebody had mentioned earlier about with the pruning. So if they're blooming and producing on old wood, be very careful about the pruning because you might be pruning your berries right off.
Yeah.
But the other factor is pruning is a good thing to keep your plant productive and healthy, and so don't forget to prune. I think sometimes people are too timid, actually, and then they don't get the next flush. So
Yeah.
works.
And what about timing for planting these edible plants? Spring, summer, fall for blueberries, spring, summer, fall for fruit trees. What are your recommendations?
Yes, yes, yes.
That's good.
I think you just don't want to, plant in the height of the heat of summer, but spring and fall are great times to plant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I I think also make sure the farther north you go, you're planting early enough in your fall. When we're planting our trials up into like zone 3 and 4, we'll err on the side of spring just to give it that extra amount of time to establish before the intense winters.
Yeah, because how many weeks would you want to plant before your first frost if you're planting in the fall?
In here, our first frost is usually towards the end of October, and we try to get everything planted by like beginning of September.
Which might be planting in the heat of the season. So that's kind of a tough time frame.
Depending on where you are.
Yeah, yeah. Was there something else, before we go into our closing comments, was there anything else that you wanted to address or bring up before we do your last tip or advice on edible perennials? And I did get another question here. Maybe we can put that in there. We know that there's a lot of annual flowers. It's the year of the calendula, so we know those are edible. Nasturtiums. Are there perennial flowers that are edible? April, that might be up your alley.
Oh, put me on the spot. Yeah.
Lavender is a great one.
Yeah.
Lavender.
Yeah, lavender, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if perennial violas are edible. I mean, I know pansies are, so it might be something to look up. Um, but yeah, I'm not thinking of anything off the top of my head. Although I do know the chives, the flower is edible on that one, so that could be like a unique garnish, for your salads or something. I mean, they're really an interesting flower. So, but yeah, I'm sure there's more on the perennials that definitely need to do some research.
All right, we'll do that.
There's
We'll
a
have a blog on it.
there's a relative of garlic, Tulbagia. The common
Oh
name is
yeah.
society garlic. I believe it's zone 7, but they're edible like chives, and then their flowers are also edible.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's not a like a small flowering plant, but feijoa, pineapple guava. It's an
Mm.
ornamental fruiting tree, and the petals are really flavorful. So depending on the variety, I've had ones that taste like bubble gum, and then some that just have like a sweet vanilla taste to them. So that was fun to visit in California.
Yeah, I love the pineapple guavas. Those are good. And yeah, and they're in the landscape and it's just like, oh yeah, the little
Oh, good. Okay, so let's wrap up with just your little closing piece of advice about you can do anything if you want, but in regards to edible perennials, let's see what you guys have to say to inspire us all to go try this type of gardening.
I think for my part, it's like, yeah, experiment and have fun with them. I mean, like just preparing for this webinar, I was like, oh wow, there's some items I've never heard of before. Like lovage and sorrel. I've heard that name, but then I read about it, like lemony flavor comes back. It's like a lemon spinach. So there's some really interesting things that could, continue to come back and also you can, be eating them from your garden, whether it be in the ground, in a raised bed or in a container. And then, like I said, with the containers, it's, have fun and you can make them look more ornamental overall, even though it has edibles in the container. Yeah, and because they're perennial, they're coming back, and it's you're not having to replace them every year. So yeah, that's my advice.
Thanks, April.
I would say consider an edible perennial instead of maybe something else you were going to do, like a boxwood or another kind of evergreen shrub. Like, take a chance and do something that can have multiple uses and be a little bit more productive. Kristen mentioned a few plants that Star grows that has introduced that have that feature. Monrovia certainly has those. So, think about the structure that some of these ornamental perennials can give your garden too. And yeah, take a risk, like April said. I like that. add something new that you never heard of before to your garden this year.
Just try it.
Just try it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the take a risk. I was gonna say be fearless. Like plants are fun, gardening should be fun. I think, think of what you would like to do. Maybe there's a theme or a type of garden that you want to do. I know people are talking about like moonlight gardens, silver gardens, and like Katie said, there's edibles that fit those palettes. And then I love that April brought up chives, and then I think we talked about herbs and chamomile. I've seen like I want to grow a tea garden. So they'll put the Camellia sinensis in, but then also grow chamomile and chives and peppermint. And it's just really cool to experiment and be able to see something at the end of the season. And you'll always learn something. So even if it was something that went wrong, you'll learn something to improve for next year.
Yeah, gardening is always like a science experiment.
Yep.
It is. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your time today. Thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate your time here.